Although it was a long layoff for the Panthers, they played to their identity, but it was the Seattle Kraken that was the more opportunistic bunch.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Seattle Kraken podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making both of our Locked On podcasts your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News and the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, joined by my sister here on the Locked On NHL Network from Locked On Kraken, and a superstar on our network who hosts the Women's Hockey Report every Saturday, Erica L. Ayala. Hermana, welcome to the show. Oh, also, let me include this part, who also covers every year down here in South Florida, the Amerigol Latam Cup. So,
that's right.
So glad to be joining forces with you for another Squadcast.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad we could make this work.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the Florida Panthers and the Seattle Kraken first game back from the long layoff after the Four Nations tournament, which we'll talk a little bit about the carryover from Four Nations in segment number 3. But this was both of their first games back. The Florida Panthers came into this one without Matthew Tkachuk after getting hurt in the first game between USA and Canada, and then also that continued in the second game. But we'll talk about the injury, the health aspect of things when it comes in the second segment, as and also the Seattle Kraken perspective on their health of what's going on. But as far as for the Panthers here for this game, a 2-1 win for the Seattle Kraken, an opportunistic bunch. Seattle goes up 1-0 after a great keep in by Vince Dunn that got the Kraken scoring on the power play, and Capo Caco continues to play well. An opportunity for him after that trade with the New York Rangers. The Florida Panthers, no shots allowed in 7 minutes after that, but the Panthers, I thought they really played to their identity with forcing turnovers, and really when it came to the Seattle Kraken's breakout chances, I thought that they were very opportunistic in how they tilted the ice in the second period. How did you see this game for how Seattle managed things around this one?
Well, I mean, at this point in the season, the Seattle Kraken and thus the fan base can't really, shoo away a win. So, in that sense, we'll absolutely take the win. That being said, on Locked On Kraken and throughout Kraken camp, what we had been hearing while the Seattle Kraken actually were in Florida a few days prior to this game was that they had to really beat the slog. Now, if you talk to in hockey at any level, there's always what coaches refer to as like kind of like a holiday slump or a slog, and this was 9 days of that. It's like and that's a significant amount of time. On the one hand, I'm sure it was the same for the Panthers. You have players that they're dealing with bumps and bruises. Maybe they don't miss time, but time off of the ice, off of their feet is going to be useful. That being said, when you're at the peak of the season, routine is critically important. And of course, as you know, there's a mandated break during this time. It's effectively Four Nations kind of was that all-star break. And so there's not activities that are happening. And that was a little bit of the concern coming in for the Seattle Kraken. I think, again, got the win, so we won't complain there. But overall, this team has struggled with consistency. They are able to kind of rev up the engines at particular times and, kind of will themselves across the finish line, drag themselves across the finish line. I think that what I liked the most about this game was that there were some elements, the remnants of that inconsistency, even in this game. But I thought the passing was a lot more creative than we've seen. It didn't look forced. I think there was a lightness to the way the Seattle Kraken played, and even how they figured out some of the things that weren't really going their way. And I do think that Jordan Eberle returning to the lineup was in part a part of the reason why the Seattle Kraken were able to, again, just kind of stay focused, not get too high, not get too low, and get the win.
Yeah, no doubt. A big boost, which we'll definitely talk more of the health and how much he means to the team in segment number 3. But for the Kraken here, just once again opportunistic on how they were able to just get through the defense of the Panthers when they did have their opportunities, and really the Panthers started tilting the ice in the second period. Sergei Bobrovsky made 2 straight saves, one of them on a wraparound by Jared McCann, and also for this one, the return of Brandon Montour and Hura getting a video tribute, and also how early they got to Florida and how him being a tour guide to the rest of his teammates. And there was a moment in the game, especially towards the end, where the Panthers didn't get a shot for the last 7 minutes and 32 seconds, where Brandon Montour breaks his stick. And Matty Beniers hands him the stick, which is he's a left-handed shot, and he gives it to Brandon Montour, who's a right-handed shot. And this took me a little bit of a flashback to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final when Kevin Stenlund broke his stick, and there was a left-handed stick handed to him. So it's a little strange of how the world works when it came to him returning, and then the extra attacker situation for the Florida Panthers at the very end, which in this game, I thought Sam Reinhart did not miss a beat, especially because incredible how the fact that he went the distance in the Four Nations faceoff for him and Sam Bennett getting in on Team Canada for them, and also winning and getting the gold, and then him getting four assists there. But also, I thought the spirits of the Panthers, because of how much of a tough time they were getting through to Joey Daccord, 10 slot shots for them. But the thing with the Panthers was the lack of second chance opportunities, which Seattle collapsing, how they collapsed around their net was outstanding with how they were able to prevent the second chances for the Panthers.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. Joey Daccord talked a little bit about that. Also, the block shots, 15 block shots for the Seattle Kraken that came off of Panther sticks. I think that's not something specific to the second, third, fourth, fifth chance opportunities that we sometimes see Joey Daccord having to deal with. We did not see that. And I thought that the defensive structure overall for the Seattle Kraken was very good. And, I think that the defense overall is usually pretty good for the Seattle Kraken. There are little things here and there. Actually, on the one goal for the Panthers, something that I noticed is that Montour just couldn't get on the inside, as that rush is coming. And so, that makes it difficult. That's going to make it difficult for the team to be successful there. But the defense overall, yes, was something good for the Seattle Kraken team, and something that we honestly need to see with more consistency. And you certainly go to your blue liners. You mentioned a lot there about Brandon Montour. And yes, we in the Kraken crew, and we had a podcast before the game, talked about how Monty was a little bit of a tour guide, although our head coach Dan Bylsma played it down a little bit, but Montour did say that they were able to get out on the boat. No fishing from what we heard, but they did get out on the boat. And it was also interesting for Brandon Montour. I'm sure Locked On Florida Panthers fans will appreciate this, but he talked about how it was a whirlwind, and to make the decision. You win a Stanley Cup, you have that celebration, and then he's making moves. He had a window that he had to make a decision on where he was going to go and pack everything up, find where he was going to live in Seattle. And although he did opt to have his, ring celebration and everything as soon as possible, he didn't want to wait until the game that we're talking about now. He also did mention that, he got his 24 hours with the cup, but felt a little FOMO seeing everyone in the off season be able to celebrate. So, it was definitely interesting to hear Monty say that Florida still feels familiar. It's still, if you think of just getting into a routine when it comes to Florida, that's definitely a part of what he felt in that game. And I'm happy for him. You always want that for someone. You put down roots and you get the respect. But as far as the Seattle side of things, Brandon Montour has been a pretty good move for us. There's, again, been a lot of inconsistencies. Brandon Montour didn't skate for a little bit going into the Four Nations, which was a Four Nations break for the most part for the Seattle Kraken, with the exception of goal scorer Capo Caco. But he's one of those guys just needed a little bit of rest, but I think he had plenty of juice. I think he enjoyed being in Florida. It was nice to see that the Florida fans respected and honored what he was able to do there. And then you get after it on the ice.
Yeah. Game 7 of the first round in 2023 when he tied that game in Boston. If that doesn't happen, I don't know if they go on that first run and then the run the very next year. And to think that how much sacrifice he made for him to also miss the next the first 16 games of the season, the very next season, him and Aaron Ekblad. To put a bow on this one, I mean, I love that Anton Lundell and Eetu Luostarinen kept it going after Four Nations, after they got a goal in transition. Unfortunately, a deflected puck really threw the Seattle defense off. And then later on, a goalie interference call, which Evan Rodrigues made no effort to get out of the crease. And even though Daccord did not make contact with him until after it was past him, no move whatsoever with that battle there. And who knows if he would have made the save there. So you got to make at least an attempt. And the fact that he was still did not give them that opportunity. And then just a bad change for the Panthers, just getting when they were getting it in transition. Then Schmidt loses Jared McCann as Shane Wright gained the zone. A 2-assist night for Shane Wright. Yeah. So he's getting up there as far as his projection, at least the games that I've seen, which 3-1-0 for the Kraken in South Florida in their short history, which is a strange all-time series so far. I that one I just don't quite understand when it comes to just that matchup. But let's transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the health of the Kraken and the lack of health for the Florida Panthers coming into the last 20 some odd games for both teams. We're going to discuss that more next here on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Kraken. But first, we're going to tell you guys all about wonderful pistachios. And are you looking for a snack that's both nutritious and delicious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, give you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to keep you feeling fuller longer. So, and I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm stacking at my desk, on a trip, or just need protein boost. They're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell that has a satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Segment 2 here on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Kraken. Thank you guys once again for making both of our Locked On podcasts your first listen of the day as we recap this 2-1 Kraken win over the Florida Panthers. A successful start to the road trip for Seattle and for the Panthers. This is actually a little bit of a scheduling luxury coming out of the Four Nations break. It's crazy. 14-game Saturday, a multitude of teams going on a back-to-back to start, which Erica will also have her own recap of the game against the Lightning later on. So it is crazy how much we saw, which Alex Ovechkin got a hat trick. Pittsburgh dominated the possession, and then the Washington Capitals end up with a win. Johnny Gaudreau's son got sung happy birthday in Columbus yesterday. And also a puck hit the face of a ringside reporter in Buffalo on Saturday. So a lot of things happened in the NHL world. But let's discuss more about the health of the Kraken. Saw Jordan Eberle return after an injury to his pelvis, which is not an injury that sounds fun to have, which is and for the Panthers, a lack of health for them coming into this. Like I said, the Panthers look like a team that was maybe a little bit gassed, although the Panthers were very positive coming out of this. They spoke about how they gave themselves some chances. Palmieri spoke about how for them, there was trends that he wasn't necessarily worried about, but still, that now that there might be a little bit of concern for Matthew Tkachuk, which one of the French ringside reporters on RDS spoke about how there's also a fear for Matthew Tkachuk, how his season might be over. But Paul Maurice did say that once they get him, it's day to day. But then once they get him and is evaluated by the doctors, then they'll make a decision on that. So nothing as far as significance to report right now, but there is still a level of concern for Matthew Tkachuk. On the Kraken side of things, tell us about just how much of a boost it was just to see Jordan Eberle come back to the lineup.
Well, it's huge. He's our second ever captain. That was after Mark Giordano, 4 moves that made sense and were communicated to him, and got traded halfway through our inaugural season, and we hadn't named a captain. Since then, Eberle, named captain at the start of this year, started really well on the top line. And then, as you mentioned, an injury to his pelvis. You would see him quite literally crutching around Climate Pledge Arena this season. But it was definitely a process. He did a conditioning loan with the Coachella Valley Firebirds just to get him some practice time while, again, the NHL was on a league mandate or a CBA mandated break. So he went to Coachella Valley to practice with the team in the AHL while Four Nations was happening. And, it's been a long haul. His leadership is, unmatched with exception of maybe, you look at Jaden Schwartz, you look at Jaden Schwartz, Jared McCann, as well as Adam Larson, some of those guys. But that cluster of guys, their leadership means so much. Even Vince Dunn, when he was out, you saw the team transition just to be a different type of team, focusing on different things when those guys are healthy and in the locker room. So to have Eberle back, great. We saw he skated about 14 minutes, a little over 14 minutes in the game against the Panthers. We're under the impression that, at least for the first handful of games out, they're not saying it's a hard stop at a certain number of minutes, but there is a little bit of kind of monitoring how he's feeling, how he's looking, of course, how he's able to perform. So he was on a line with Brandon Tanev and Mitchell Stevens. So working his way back. But what I liked is that, he seemed to not miss a beat. He seemed to really be getting after it, make some attempts at net. So that's good. The unfortunate news, though, for the Seattle Kraken is that the same day that we get Eberle back, it was officially announced that Yanni Gourde on long-term injured reserve. That's retroactive to, I believe, January 4th or something along those lines. And that's a tough one. He's our sandpaper, the pepper pot, as he's known. And also, he has ties to Florida. Didn't make the, not with the team, of course, not on the ice for that Tampa game, as you said, that we will talk about on Locked On Kraken. So that's been a little bit tough. Even players like Matty Beniers, we're hearing, at least going into or coming out of the break and going into this game that we're recapping, Armando, he was day-to-day. Dan Bilesma, our head coach, has mentioned a few other players. He didn't want to name them officially, but they're monitoring some things there. So not a completely healthy Seattle Kraken team. Haven't been all season. We've had some significant injuries. I mentioned Vince Dunn earlier. He spent a good portion of the first part of the season out of the lineup. And, the other thing, not injury related, but definitely interesting, and it pertains, of course, to the Tampa game that we'll talk about on Locked On Kraken. But Joey Daccord has had to do a lot of work because he is the only goaltender as of, Sunday morning, I'll say, that had any NHL experience, because Philip Grubauer, not on a conditional loan, but went through waivers and is now with the Coachella Valley Firebirds. That gave Alice Stetska, one of our prospects, an opportunity to be the backup goalie for Joey Daccord. So you mentioned those back-to-backs, not great from a Kraken perspective, just because we knew we could only get Joey for one of those games. So again, something that we'll talk about a little bit more, doesn't pertain to this particular matchup, but is related to, as you talked about, just kind of what our roster is looking like right now.
Yeah, fall from grace after being a Vezina Trophy finalist, but then I have to mention this because there's some relation to the Florida Panthers, because Joey Daccord, former Charlotte Checker from when these two teams shared an affiliate back just a few years ago in the Kraken's inaugural season there. So that's another thing for Joey Daccord, just the story. And then I just remember his outstanding performance in the Winter Classic against the Vegas Golden Knights, and then also held his own for when the Panthers outshot the Kraken 33-18
Yeah.
in their first matchup in back in December, which is crazy. That Western swing for the Panthers is always a struggle. The year before they got shut out in Seattle and then Vancouver, and then this time around it was Vancouver again and then Calgary the next night. So it's always those back-to-back nights in those West Coast swings for the Panthers here when it comes to just an ability to find offense for them. And it was another thing tonight for not tonight, Saturday for the Panthers as they struggled. But as far as the Panthers on just how they're going to be able to manage this time without Matthew Tkachuk, however much it's going to be, which I said it was going to be a while. And I even said this before he even played on Thursday. I said he's going to play and then going to miss some time because Four Nations, Etu Lutherain even mentioned it that coming back to the Panthers and then playing in a regular season game, it's like, yeah, it felt like you're going from a playoff game to a regular season game all of a sudden. But
just like that. That's so interesting. Yeah, I can imagine. And actually, since you mentioned it, I wanted to go back because this is something we mentioned in passing, previewing this matchup between the Panthers and the Kraken. Kaapo Kakko went to Four Nations, didn't even play all of the games for Team Finland, but did not anywhere close to put as much mileage on in the break as a Matthew Tkachuk or some of the other players or Barkov, in that even just looking at Team Finland. So I'm curious to hear from you, what are what's the fan base kind of feeling about having these players return? And is there anything to, this quote unquote slog that we've been talking about a lot in Kraken media?
It's funny because Barkov actually took a goal from Kaapo Kakko on a deflection. I remember parked right in front of the net.
Then he scored almost in the exact same area against the Panthers. That's his spot, I guess.
So yeah, they were in great position in that game against Sweden back on that Saturday, that rivalry Saturday. But yeah, I mean, just like any typical fan base, I mean, they're going to be worried about their health coming back because obviously they're going to care for their club team and what they do. They watch them more, and of course, for the Panther side of things, they're happy for guys like Sam Reinhart and Sam Bennett, even for some of them, if it's not necessarily their country. But yeah, this is always going to be a topic of conversations, something that's going to be recycled over and over again. We're going to have these same conversations going even into the Olympics, but this is something that guys want, that players want, and we have to we have to respect it. And I even said this I'm not going to take back what I said on Friday, that for the Panthers management, they owe Matthew Tkachuk because of the big trade and just him changing the identity of the Panthers. I feel like in a way they kind of owed him to play in that game and to at least try, but at the same time, I'm not feeling the effects of Matthew Tkachuk's injury. I don't know necessarily what's going on, like the pain, excuse me, as far as that. But at the same time, there's also that argument of saving someone from themselves. And there's also that argument that I can understand because Kyle Connor in that last game was a scratch and he struggled through the tournament, but Matthew Tkachuk said that there were in the Stanley Cup final in 2023 when he got hurt with his sternum, that there were 20 some odd other guys that were better than him. We didn't hear it this time around, but I mean, when you don't have international hockey, I can understand why you're not gonna be you're gonna be more motivated to play and actually to play through so much pain.
Yeah, he was clearly uncomfortable even going back to, some of the games leading up to the championship game. So we said it on the show, but worth saying again, especially since we're on here with you, Armando, and Panthers fans are going to hear this, but we definitely want Matthew Tkachuk to just have a speedy recovery, get the rest that he needs. I think he really showed, his brother and that whole team really showed what USA hockey could potentially look like. It's been a while at the senior level, at the international level, since we've seen, a USA team come together. And so I'm excited. As someone who is accredited for Milano Cortina, I'm super excited that the NHLers will be back. I did go to Beijing as well, and that was right around the time we had drafted Matty Beniers, so I got to see him from Michigan. Final Four, or excuse me, Frozen Four. I'm thinking basketball. Frozen Four in Boston, close to his hometown. Got to see him in Beijing, and I don't know. Beniers obviously was an odd man out for Team USA. I think that's probably going to be the case again. But there's plenty of international flavor on the Kraken, and I'm excited to see what that's going to look like.
No doubt, and I'm excited, and of course we'll definitely see on the Locked On AHL channel. You be joining the channel from over there in Milano Cortina for sure. But let's transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss more about what's next for these two teams, as the trade deadline is now just less than 2 weeks away. We're going to discuss that next here on this crossover of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Kraken. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on fourth quarter comebacks, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets on a same game parlay. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 3 here on this crossover of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Seattle Kraken. Thank you once again for making Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Kraken your first listen of the day. So I'm very excited for what Four Nations and the carryover could do. 5 nationally televised games throughout the weekend. And then coming off that is the Skate for LA Strong. I watched the first part of it where we saw PK Subban get into a fight at the beginning of it. Snoop Dogg, Vince Vaughn, Aaron Andrews, Jackie Redmond. There's so many people over there for that outstanding event over, and just for a great cause with the LA Fires over there. But it's crazy, Erica, because it's just all going to depend on what the Panthers do with if Matthew Tkachuk is in fact placed on LTIR. They're going to have a whole bunch of space to play with. So as far as the names that they'll get that they could possibly get, that's something that I'll break more into on tomorrow's show, because we just don't know if it's in fact going to happen. It's all speculation at this point for the Panthers. But for Seattle, about a few points out, quite a bit for them.
Just a few.
Just a few. But still a big hill to climb for them. Yeah. And obviously, whenever you're a bit away from the wild card spot, which for the Kraken, they're going to be sellers at the deadline. Unfortunately, it's funny because a few weeks ago I actually spoke about possibility of Yanni Gourde being traded to the Panthers, but now that it doesn't look like that's going to be a possibility. I was looking at possibilities of him shifted to the wing, but then there's reports a few weeks ago about the Seattle Kraken taking calls on Jared McCann, and Jared McCann scored 40 goals before, and he's been a complimentary piece. 2 years left on the contract, but then I think about this for Seattle. They are still relatively new franchise, trying to build their pipeline there. So when I think about Jared McCann and trade with term, I also think about this. When you're a new franchise, you need a little bit of continuity on your roster when it comes to just getting things together. And I know there's still the pressure is going to mount, especially and go up, especially come next season for Seattle, especially because there's an NBA team that's possibly going to be going there as well for them. So what do you think the direction of Seattle that they're gonna go in based on the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of it right there, but I agree. Well, I'll put it this way: the Seattle Kraken should be sellers. Now, why do I say that, Armando? Because it's been well documented throughout Ron Francis and his his front office career, but also I'm kind of living it now as host of Locked On Kraken. The Seattle Kraken, under the wing, of course, of general manager Ronnie Francis, are known to be very conservative. We racked up a lot of prospects early, utilized our expansion draft really as a way to turn over players for picks. I mentioned Mark Giordano was a part of that. And that's led to us having a very successful or a very high ranked prospect pool. The challenge is that the prospect pool, especially the Berkeley Cattons, you mentioned Shane Wright earlier, who's finding his stride. He put on some weight. He looks great. That being said, he's still, I don't know, a season and a half away from like legitimately every night being like that guy for us, right? Matty Beniers took a step back last year. I think that, he's still trying to find his stride this year. So that means that, to your point that you just mentioned about Jared McCann, if we are complete wholesale sellers this year, then what is the bridge to our very highly touted prospect pool? There won't be one if we get rid of players like Jared McCann. Matty Beniers, we signed an extension to. Montour we'll have for a while. Chandler Stevenson, we in theory, right, we're keeping those guys. But when it comes to players like a Jared McCann, now why I think and we talked about this on the Locked On Kraken show, why I think he made sense is for reasons also, Armando, that you've already brought up. Yanni Gourde, now he's injured. What is that going to look like for any trade prospects? Brandon Tanev is a player that was also in conversation, but Brandon Tanev, I think one way or another, his time with the Seattle Kraken might be up, but is this going to be, I know we're talking about players, we're talking about human beings and they're changing their lives. The other part of the truth of the situation, right, is that the Seattle Kraken are going to want to get as much value as possible if indeed they're going to be sellers. Because again, you've got the prospects coming, but the ownership group continues to say that they're not giving up on winning now. It's not a rebuild, it's a refocus is what we heard, right? So you still need elements, you still need players that are going to be able to do that and anchor that. Jared McCann can be that guy. I think he's gotten a little bit lost in the shuffle with so many lines having to change. And I think he's kind of had to bite the bullet and go where is best for the team, but maybe not that sets him up best to do what he does best, which again, that's a balancing act that you have to factor in when you're trying to get Matty Beniers going, when you're trying to get Shane Wright going. So I think he's gotten a little lost in the sauce, and I think that's why he has been one of the names put out there. But if I could summarize everything that I just said, including that we've already talked about Philip Grubauer, the Seattle Kraken need a little bit of everything, and they're not going to get everything that they need at the trade deadline. I have questions if they'll get it done in the offseason because they haven't been able to find the right balance. So as much as the Seattle Kraken want to say that this isn't a rebuild, they're not there yet. As you mentioned, it's not a if, it's a when. The Supersonics are coming back. That's what everyone in Seattle believes. That's what everyone in Seattle is prepared for. And the Seattle Kraken are not winning right now. So when they are not the hottest ticket or even the newest ticket in town, how is that going to impact the dollars and cents behind the team? So this is a really interesting time for the Seattle Kraken. I do hope that this motivates Ron Francis and the rest of the front office to make some moves, but it's not just about making a move. It's about making the right move. And that's where the balancing act for the Seattle Kraken, the scales don't always align, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Philip Grubauer is if they were to buy him out, it actually doesn't hurt them too much from what I'm looking, because not a lot of signing bonus money, or not really any at all. So that's actually going to be beneficial for them.
Right. And that's one of the things, we haven't talked about this in a while, but that's one of the things that, as uncomfortable and as ridiculous as it kind of sounds to have a guy with that much money in the AHL, this reset of his, he obviously wasn't ready, or the ownership team didn't think he was ready to come back. That's why we got Stetska, and spoiler alert to Panthers fans, but he did play in Tampa on Sunday. And again, we'll talk about that on the Locked On Kraken show. That show's probably already up. But that's what you're talking about, getting just to the point where his contract is something that if we have to offload, we can. But it's been painful because if we're being honest, I don't put all of this on Philip. Again, I think it's some of the team. Chris Drieger, unfortunately, could just never stay healthy for us. He's another guy that ended up going to the AHL. But these are all things that you have to weigh when it comes to the front office. And are they making the right moves at the right time? And it seems like the Seattle Kraken are just missing in key areas, goaltending being one of them.
Yeah, and on the Panthers side of things, before we end the show, I mean, teams were a little wary of the Panthers on them pulling off something out of their out of a hat, and when it comes to teams and their ability to probably retain salary, who knows? Maybe the Seattle Kraken could be a broker and help the Florida Panthers and getting someone. And if Matthew Tkachuk's added cat space on LTIR, if that happens to be a thing, they won't have to sacrifice the lack of assets that they don't have, because they don't have a first round pick until 2026, and that's also the same year where there will have a lot of cap space opened up now that we know some of the projections coming up. So it's still something to monitor for the Panthers, and that is we're gonna actually put names to them on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and just discuss what could be the possible names that could be brought to the Florida Panthers if Matthew Tkachuk is in fact out long term. But Erica, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, another successful crossover edition between you and I. Thank you so much as always. Tell everybody where they can follow you.
For sure. Well, thank you again, Armando. It's always nice to be on with you. And hey, Locked On Panthers fans, or just Panthers fans overall, make sure you tell Goldie, tell Steve I say hey. He and I used to call women's hockey games together, so that's a lot of fun. But y'all can find me, of course, anywhere you find Locked On Kraken, which will be on YouTube, anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. And you can find me personally at elindsay08. That's ELIND SAY08 on Blue Sky is where I do most of my social media-ing these days.
Awesome. And for the Kraken people, you can follow me on X and on Blue Sky at Monoman12, show account at LO_FLA Panthers on X and Instagram and LO FLA Panthers on Blue Sky as well. So, and Locked On Panthers anywhere you listen to podcasts. So, Erica, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Erica Ayala, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.